Magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent and this is the unit focus video on Baharroth, the swooping hawk Phoenix Lord. In these unit focus videos, I talk about what the unit is, its role on the table, obstacles to using it effectively, and how to play around those obstacles. Now, longtime subscribers and listeners may remember that in previous videos, I have said that the only Phoenix Lord seriously worth considering for competitive play is probably Fugan. Sometimes Karen Dross edges into GT podium lists, and occasionally somebody does something sort of clever with Jane Czar, although I think Jane Czar is a pretty marginal pick. But up until very recently, Baharroth was certainly not a serious consideration for competitive play. However, since I made those earlier comments, three things have happened. One, the meta has shifted significantly. There's still lots of vehicles and monsters in the meta, but we're currently seeing a great deal more durable infantry flooding mid-board objectives. Another change is that there have been some nerfs to Eldar, most notably the loss of Phantasm, which has made it harder to do with other units what you can do with Baharroth leading a big unit of Swooping Hawks. And lastly, credit where credit is due, March was not a great month for competitive Eldari, certainly compared to how they had been performing. There have been Eldari lists that have made it to the podium at GTs in various places in America and Europe, but not many. And there's certainly not a standout army compared to the other factions that are appearing regularly in the last 8. Space Elves are no longer the army to beat, not even close. And frankly, that's a relief. It's tedious to be one of the most hated armies in the game. But there was a recent GT list that podiumed, that an Eldari list featuring Baharroth running 10 Swooping Hawks. So credit where credit is due. It was really that list that got me thinking about how suddenly Baharroth is a consideration. He really does have something to offer. And in initial runs with this, I've been shocked how well this combo can do. So Baharroth, not a narrative include in the right meta, used in the right way. I think he's really, really good. And if you're really excited about dusting off that model that's older than some of the people listening to this video, I think he dates from the mid-90s. He was a release for the second edition of the game Eldari Codex, the very first Eldar Codex ever to be created. That's how old Baharroth is. But it's no longer a nostalgia move to pick Captain Chicken. I mean, it actually hasn't been that long because he was the best Phoenix Lord in the game in 9th edition. So it's not like the Hawk and Chief has been riding the bench for all that long, but he's back. So we'll start with a quick look at his stat line, and then I'll talk a little bit about how he's functioning in lists and how to get the most out of him, because there's some interesting tricks. It's not necessarily totally obvious. So he's got, like all Swooping Hawks, he has a 14-inch move. He's T3, as Phoenix Lords are now. He has the 2-up save for the Phoenix Lord armor, always nice. 5 wounds, leadership 6-up, OC1, standard Phoenix Lord stat line 4-up, invuln save, and then his actual weapon loadout is kind of unimpressive compared to the other Phoenix Lords. Fury of the Tempest, his signature relic gun, has only 4 attacks. It has assault and lethal hits like all of the Swooping Hawk weapons, but it's only got 4 attacks. It hits on 2s. It's strength 6, which is only 1 better than the gun the XR carries, and then it has -1 AP and flat 2 damage. So it's got 1 AP instead of no AP, and it does an extra damage compared with the Swooping Hawk XR Las Blaster. Not that impressive. And then he has a melee weapon, the Shining Blade, which is kind of fine. 6 attacks with sustained hits 1. That's cool. Hits on 2s, strength 5, not bad. -2 AP, flat 2 damage. So good into heavy infantry. Pretty good, pretty good. But certainly you don't look at those numbers and think to yourself, I really need to pay 125 points for this fellow because there's a lot of other good stuff you could get for 125 points, like a D-cannon platform. However, what makes Baharroth really good is that when he's leading a big unit of Swooping Hawks, 10 Swooping Hawks, not only, like all Phoenix Lords, does he add 1 to their hit roll so they hit on 2s with that insane amount of fire that they put out, but also he has the Cloud Strider ability. So in your shooting phase, after this model's unit has shot, if it is not within engagement range of enemy units, that unit can make a normal move of up to 6 inches as if it were your movement phase, and then it cannot charge. So Baharroth, leading 10 Swooping Hawks, can shoot with his weapon, and then with those stats I just mentioned, and then your Swooping Hawks put out 40 shots, and then that whole unit just flappy flaps away to safety. And combined with their inherent mobility, Swooping Hawks have a 14-inch move, and they have assault weapons, so they really have 14 inches plus D6, and they have that crazy redeploy ability, where at the end of your opponent's turn, the whole squad can go back into deep strike, and you bring them back in your own movement phase anywhere on the board outside of 9 inches of an opponent. Well, you can do that, shoot something, and then flappy flap to safety. And because they're an infantry unit, they can move right through solid walls with breachable. So you can keep them totally safe, completely out of line of sight. Pretty good range to make that possible at 24 inches. And you put out just this insane volume of fire. Now, albeit with no AP, but with lethal hits. And this opens up some interesting possibilities. And the first of these is the simplest. It's just the virtue of unanswerable fire in relatively significant volume. So you put out the relic weapon plus 40 shots with lethal hits at 24 inches. Obviously, that's picking up very effectively units of light infantry. But with the lethal hits, also, it can put some wounds on heavier stuff too, including tanks and monsters. And just with weight of dice, you can push through some saves. So in the first turn or so of the game, maybe your Hawks are jumping through some wall just in front of your own backfield in the midfield, laying down withering fire on some of those enemy infantry units that are so popular right now that are trying to get a purchase in the midfield, and then jumping back behind the wall. And then as you thin out your opponent's army, it becomes easier when your deep strikers can't be screened to pick these things up, drop them on your opponent's part of the board, and use them for scoring secondary objectives, for taking objectives on your opponent's side of the table, maybe posing a threat to your opponent's backfield objective in mission play where there's a reward for doing that, while also continuing to participate in the battle. Now, there are a couple of ways to make the fire output of this unit even better, and one of the most obvious ones is with guide. So the Farseer Skyrunner has the guide power. In your command phase, you roll a 2-up, you pick a unit within 12 inches, and that unit can re-roll the hit roll. Now, it's already true that your Hawks are hitting on 2s, so you're hitting with a significant volume of fire. Sure, it's nice to be able to re-roll the 1s, but there's a reason to do this that's not re-rolling the 1s on high volume of fire, and it's because of lethal hits. If you were playing in 9th edition, you may remember how this trick works. This was a popular Eldari trick. So you start with a target that should be a little bit above the Hawk's pay grade, maybe a tank or a monster with a 3-up save that they can only wound on 6s. Well, you roll, including the Fury of the Tempest, you're rolling 44 dice, 4 of those dice being the Baharroth hits that have a little AP and come in a little bit harder, but you roll 44 dice, and everything that's not a 6, you re-roll to fish for as many 6s as possible to trigger lethal hits. You should get about 7, and then you reroll everything that's not a 6. You get about 7 6s again, and then when you roll the wound, you're only wounding on 6s, but you get to roll all of the dice that wounded, and maybe you pick up another 4, 5, and what you end up with is like 18, 19 wounds with these weapons that theoretically would not normally be a threat to a heavy target. Now given on a 3-up save, your opponent is going to ignore a third of those, or 2/3 of those, only half of the ones coming from Baharroth himself, who does flat 2 damage. But nevertheless, some are going to get through, and that means that your Hawks, which are theoretically exclusively an anti-infantry unit and kind of only an anti-light infantry unit, may put 5 or 6 wounds on a tank and then be untargetable. And they can do even better against stuff that they can wound on a 4 or a 5. So something like a unit of Space Marines, where Baharroth and the Exarch are going to be wounding those Marines on 3s, and everybody else is wounding them on a 4 up. Just the sheer volume of fire is going to be sufficient, and especially in combination with the lethal hits, to push a bunch of hits through the armor. And you definitely don't need to have the Farseer Skyrunner like following around your Hawks to do this every turn. You're not going to do it every turn. You only really need to do this if you want to play your Hawks into something that would normally be a little bit too durable for their pay grade. But the Farseer Skyrunner is good. There are certainly other units that can benefit from Guide. It's not bad to attach the Farseer to some jet bikes with shuriken cannons. Again, in the current meta, those are pretty solid. So I don't think you need to think about the Farseer Skyrunner as an extra expense on top of this tool that you're buying, Baharroth and the 10 Hawks, at 275 points, because the Farseer is also off playing his or her or their own game. Now, there's a way that you can make this even better. Both Baharroth and the Swooping Hawks have the grenade keyword. So you land near something, and before you fire something tough that you wouldn't normally be able to damage, before you fire, you roll the 6d6, and on average you do 3 mortal wounds to it, and then you blast it using the combo that I just mentioned. And now suddenly Baharroth and your 10 Hawks might be doing like 8 or 9 damage. They might even on their own destroy a light tank, which is freaking crazy, and then jump away to safety. But that's not all, because even though Baharroth's what's his melee weapon called? It's just an Eldari like souped up power sword. It's called the Shining Blade. It's got 6 attacks. We said this hitting on 2 is -2, flat 2. Well, in combination with the Eldari power sword that the Swooping Hawk Exarch gets for free, which has 3 attacks at -2 AP, 1 damage, strength 4, there's actually some decent melee output here. And Guide works both in the shooting phase and in the melee phase. And then the Hawks themselves are putting out like another 18 attacks. And yeah, they're crappy, but that's just weight of dice, and you are re-rolling the hit roll if Guide is on there. So potentially you can jump out with Baharroth and 10 Hawks, grenade something for an average of 3 mortal wounds, put 44 shots into it, fishing for lethal hits, do a bunch of damage to something really tough, charge it if it still has a couple of wounds left, kill it in melee, and then at the end of your opponent's turn, if you've like won on this portion of the board, just go back into reserve and then come in out of deep strike next turn. That's really good. Now, obviously, committing to melee will prevent you from sky leaping to safety, or the Baharroth like move through the wall to safety move. So you want to be judicious about how you think about doing this. The Hawks are fragile. The 5-up invuln is really good, but they're still fragile. And nevertheless, though, at 275 points, the cost basically of a couple of D cannons, this is a really powerful tool that's highly mobile. It does the Eldari things. It outmaneuvers the opponent. It's really good into infantry, but then you can use these tricks to make it good into like everything. Pretty good. But I can't really overstate the value of the mobility with reference also to what's made possible as far as secondary scoring and even primary scoring, the ability to threaten an opponent's objectives in their own backfield or on quadrants of the board that are just sort of out of reach when you don't have a whole lot of models left it's great. It's really good. And now that we can no longer shoot with anything and then just phantasm it away, the ability to use this unit to fire and fade for not 2 CP is really excellent, especially if you also have a couple of units of Shadow Specters. So you have a couple of units of Shadow Specters doing this, your Swooping Hawks are doing this, you have a couple of indirect fire platforms, and then you have a very like classically elf list where you're putting out really good firepower, and it's very difficult for your opponent to respond in kind. And then when you have points advantage on the field, then you come out and you get really aggressive with everything. Okay. Some obstacles to using this effectively. The first is, I think, sort of obvious, but I have to say it. Like, when you're coming in out of Deep Strike or you're moving with this unit, you do have to be a little bit careful of torrent weapons, Overwatch, right? Hawks die really easily to things like flamers, heavy flamers. So just be smart. Don't land in heavy flamer range of an opponent's unit when they have CP to blow on Overwatch. The bigger one, of course, is the lack of AP on the majority of the Hawks shooting. So one thing that you can do is to try to get through this with weight of dice, and Guide really helps with that. But the other option is to use the Bladestorm stratagem. So Bladestorm is a stratagem that gives your 6s to wound 2 additional AP. So if you used it on the squad, any 6s that Baharroth himself rolls to wound will come in at -4, and anything that your regular Hawks are putting out will come in at -2. This is pretty good. And if you're targeting a unit of, say, Space Marines, and you've really got to wipe it out, a few shots coming in with pretty good AP really can help get you there. It can get you over the top. It is a little bit of a bummer because Bladestorm is at odds with lethal hits. If you're auto wounding, you don't have the opportunity to then fish for the 6s. I would not use, so if you're using the Guide trick, I probably wouldn't combine it with Bladestorm, because then you're going to have even fewer dice that you're actually using to wound. But if you're not running the Farseer Skyrunner, or this Farseer Skyrunner is simply too far away and you target a unit with a pretty good armor save, Bladestorm can be a worthwhile CP investment. Now, if you're also throwing the grenades, this starts to get a little bit expensive, which is one of the reasons that I think I like to use Guide most of the time. But it's important to remember that Bladestorm exists, because occasionally there will be instances where it makes sense to do this. Another thing I really like about Baharroth and the big unit of Hawks is it's a nice answer to your opponent's highly mobile units. So in the first turn of the game, when you're trying to destroy the stuff that your opponent has that can actively counter your mobility, Hawks can go wide, right? 14 inches plus D6 to get an angle on something at a 24-inch range, have that crazy good fire output, maybe with Guide, and then jump away to safety, and then at the end of your opponent's turn, go back into reserve to come out where you need them. And the last thing I'll say about this is that ability to go back into reserve on your opponent's turn and then come out on your turn really does increase the overall value of the unit, because something occasionally happens in games of 40K where in the last 2 turns of the game, particularly on turn 5, but also to some degree on turn 4, sometimes the fighting is kind of over in one part of the board, and you end up with units, maybe reasonably expensive units, that are struggling to participate in the battle where it still matters, and that just never happens with your Hawks. Your Hawks can always, even in the late game, get back in there, and they're mobile enough that they're likely to be able to survive until the late game. So it's this very useful tool. Whenever you're calculating a value of a unit, I think it makes sense to think about both its ability to very quickly pick up things that your opponent needs. So really high output, damage output units that maybe are a little bit fragile make sense, because you can trade them for stuff that's essential to your opponent. But then the ability to continue to contribute to the battle every turn of the game, when you calculate the overall value of the unit, units that have longevity really are more valuable. And so even though the Hawks shooting, it's not crazy high strength, doesn't have a ton of AP, I think with those tricks you can work around that. And then the fact that they probably are playing every turn of the game, that's really good. This is a really solid pick. It's not an auto include. And for 275 points, if you needed something that was predominantly target elimination for highly durable units, there are better picks. But in a meta where there's a lot of infantry right now, having something that's really, really good into light infantry, solid into heavy infantry, but also can like multi-class into being a threat to anything, highly durable targets too, that's a great tool. So that's what I've got for today. If you haven't used Baharroth in 10th edition, now is a great time to do it. If you are trying to find the model, there are enough in circulation that it is often available on eBay. It's not an expensive way to add an extra dimension to your army if you've already got the Hawks. And if you have your own ideas about how to use Baharroth effectively, I hope that you will leave those in the comments below. Or if you just want to say something in the comments below, that's very helpful to me, as are likes. I also just appreciate it. It's encouraging. A special thank you as always to my patrons who have not only made this content continue long beyond when it would have, but also keep me excited about it. We have a great Discord community. If you want to join, it's only $3 a month for the more basic level. I always appreciate the nicer levels too. And also a thank you to Conrad, the Magnet Baron, who's been a fabulous sponsor of the channel for quite a while now. If you are magnetizing bases or models or whatever, his magnets are a great deal and they're excellent. It's easy to have a sponsor who makes something that that I use myself, which is great. All right, that's it. Back again soon with new content. Until then, best of luck in your next campaign.